Welcome back to another episode of So You're Ready to Date. Last week, we talked pretty extensively about how to survive and even thrive on your first date. So now hopefully you've had that first date, you've taken that chance. And today we are going to dive in and reflect on that date and kind of talk about next steps. What comes next and what do you do if nothing comes next?
Yeah, hopefully everything went well. You didn't have a complete and total disaster of a first date, but this is the time when we kind of do some reflection. This is some time when you can kind of give yourself a little bit of space and a moment to maybe decide, how was the date? What did I see that I liked? What didn't I like? Is there potential that I want to see this person again? So we're going to hopefully break that down a little bit today.
Right. So first things first, as Lisa said, congratulations, you made it. You stepped outside of your comfort zone. You got through that first date. Hopefully you had a great time and you remembered to just relax and have fun. And if you didn't, take it as a learning opportunity and really sit back and just reflect on what would you do differently next time in order to relax and let yourself have fun. Because as Brene Brown likes to say, people are people are people are people. They're just people. So whether or not you hit it off, whether or not you connect, and whether or not you're going on that second date, you can just sit back and relax and have fun with other people.
Yes. So as we kind of look back on that first date, of course, some of the things you want to look at are like, were there red flags? Were there green flags? Just to kind of get a sense of, how do I feel about this person? How do I feel about taking this forward? Remember, this is not about trying to plan your entire future. This is like, do I even want to go to dinner with this person? Do we want to go have drinks again? We're not trying to make this about anything more than just another night out or another day out with a person that you're trying to get to know a little bit better.
So I guess the first thing to really think about was, how did the conversation flow? Was it easy to have a conversation? Did they contribute to the conversation? Were you holding most of the conversation? Was the conversation equally focused on both parties? Did you get to talk about yourself some, and did they get to talk about themselves? Did you learn something about the person that you were with? What did you learn about the person that you're with? And again, just really remembering or thinking back and reflecting on how that conversation went.
Yeah, I remember ages ago when I would start dating, I hated talking about myself. So I'm sure most of the conversations felt very one-sided on their part, because I would answer a question as quickly as I could to get every attention off of me and right back to that other person. But understanding that it's not going to be 50-50. It's not going to, like, I had equal time to talk about me. They had equal time to talk about them. But was there a nice exchange? Did it flow really well? Did it feel like they were listening and maybe asking pertinent questions to kind of keep the conversation going? Or was it very much like a yes answer, a no answer, and you felt like there wasn't this give and take? Because that's what you really want. Somebody who can have that give and take back and forth with you. It does, again, we're not looking for 100% equal, but did it feel like you had enough of an opportunity to talk about yourself, to ask the questions that you wanted to ask? And did the conversation feel good? We need to kind of tap into, like, did it feel good to talk to this person? Or was it a chore? Was it way more work than it felt like you were getting out of it? So those are all of the parts to start to take into consideration as we talk about reviewing and reflecting on the date.
Right. I remember one time I was with a guy, no names, no nothing, but it was a long time ago. And I would be in the middle of a conversation or talking about something that happened in my life. And suddenly they were bringing up something that had absolutely no relevance to the conversation I thought we were having. Now, I know that happens sometimes in life. And I know that sometimes happens to me because thoughts pop into my head. And sometimes they just come out of my mouth before I can stop them, and I don't wait for an appropriate place. So I know that happens. I'm not saying that is a red flag off the bat, but I also know that this happened very often, very, very often, which made me feel unheard. And that was a red flag. And you may not know that after a first date. So we may be talking a little bit further down the line here, but that's something to pay attention to when you're talking about those conversations or when you're reflecting back and thinking about those conversations?
That's an excellent point. Are they listening to respond, or are they listening to be an active participant in the conversation? Because you can obviously tell sometimes there are people who are like just waiting for you to stop so that they can interject either their story about X, Y, or Z, or like you said, find a topic because they just wanted to kind of shoehorn this thing in here. But yeah, making sure that it feels like you're being listened to, that they're asking questions that feel relevant to hopefully the conversation you feel like you're both you're both having. So I think that kind of segues us nicely into kind of talking about some of the red flags that may not necessarily disqualify somebody from a second date, but I think these are always the things that we start watching, because people can say something, but we really have to watch their actions. So were there any kind of like, Angie, do you have like red flags that you typically maybe not necessarily will disqualify somebody, but are really like high alert? I'm going to keep a watch on this so that in case it starts to maybe snowball into a bigger red flag, I'm aware.
I do. And I actually want to back up a little bit because it's a really good point. We should be looking at red flags. But before we really get into that, I want to point out people are going to see what they're looking for. So don't walk into a first date looking for red flags. This isn't reflect and find all of the red flags, because if you look for them, everybody has flaws and they're going to be there. But there are certain things that for me personally are a little bit of a cause for concern. Now, these may not be the same for everybody. I do think that there are some standard red flags that may go up that could be safety related, such as, how controlling was this person? Is there that element of control? And did you feel like, I think, Lisa, you were kind of talking recently about a guy that you had seen, and right away he started yelling at you, or maybe not even yelling at you, but kind of accusing you of not doing things that he expected you to do, but didn't communicate that he wanted you to even do those things. And that to me feels like controlling behavior. So I'm kind of on the lookout for that kind of a red flag. Is there a controlling element to that?
Yeah. And that's, I think, a good one, because it was one of those things that it was kind of like, did I read this right? Did he just really like pout in this text because I didn't reply back fast enough? So again, it was one of those things that I'm like, it makes me feel just a little uneasy, but I'm like, literally, we were like 3 days into talking. So I want to try to give people the benefit of the doubt that maybe we have a different communication style. And as we get to know each other, as we get to start talking, maybe that'll kind of be one of those little hiccups that manages to work itself out. But it's a great idea that you brought up, that to go in looking for all of the things that are wrong, that's exactly probably what we're going to find. But having those list of things that you want to be on the lookout for, you want to watch for, is not a bad thing. Just maybe keeping that in the back of your mind. We're not bringing it out in the middle of this date. We're not trying to check off all of these things, but that awareness of what things make me feel icky in my body. And this is one of those times you're like listening to that gut feeling, listening to maybe that sensation in our chest, the tingling in our fingers, our hands, anything that our bodies are kind of the best warning system for us when things are not probably going to go in the way that we hope. So listening to those little kind of like micro signals and be like, this doesn't seem like enough of a red flag to kind of really break things off, but it's enough that it's kind of making me concerned and aware that I'm going to watch things and see how they progress.
For sure. I mean, for me, I once dated a guy. So as we're kind of talking about that and going through some other scenarios, I once dated a guy that was trying to buy me very expensive jewelry after a first date. To me, that was a red flag. I don't want somebody to buy my affection. Now, that could just be a love language thing, but it felt very unbalanced in where we were at in the relationship. And I wasn't ready to reciprocate something like that. So to me, that gave me a tingly feeling and told me to walk away. So thinking about what are things that make you feel uncomfortable, as Lisa had kind of said, or as you said, Lisa, where you feel that in your body and using that as an indicator. And then the other thing for red flags is everybody's are going to be different. What are your no-fly zones? What list do you have of what you don't want in a partner, right? It's important to know what you don't want in order to know what you do want. So as you're making a list of what you do want, pay attention, because the opposite of that is what you don't want. So are the people that you're dating, or the people that you're going on dates, or the people that you're talking to, where do they fall on the list? Are they falling primarily in your no-fly zone, or are there some that are, maybe they're negotiable if they meet enough criteria on your green flag list, so they're not really red flags? You can be the judge of that. You're the only one that can really be the judge of that. But I think it's important to just pay attention, like you said, kind of keep that in the back of your mind, to know when you're choosing a partner that you get to choose. Just like you might not be their cup of tea, they might not be your cup of tea, and that's okay.
Right. And it comes to a point where you're like, not everybody's going to like you. You're not going to like everybody. And trying to shoehorn people into something, because you can get to a point where you feel frustrated and exhausted, and you're like, there is always sometimes that little moment, like, maybe I'll just settle. Maybe I can just shoehorn this person in and it'll be good enough and it won't be okay. But this is not about trying to fit somebody into these criteria that you have. This is about trying to find somebody who ticks enough of the green boxes, and the reds are, sometimes the red flags don't necessarily have to be the big bad things. They can just be, they chew with their mouth open, or you snort when you laugh, or there can be all of these things that maybe aren't ideal in your prospective partner, but they're not necessarily like, oh, he seems controlling or slightly abusive or whatever. When we say red flags, sometimes those like big red flags come into mind, but maybe sometimes they're these little things that feel like an annoyance right now. And then we can start to have that conversation of like, is this something that's going to annoy me 6 months down the road? Or is this something that can end up being just like a lovable quirk about somebody and less of a red flag?
And feelings can change. So again, you're not looking to make a marriage decision after a first date. That's not what you're doing. I think the biggest, even more than red flags and green flags, and we're going to talk about green flags in a second and when to kind of push the gas. But I think even more than that, when you're reflecting on this, red flags should be a very short kind of consideration, because you're going to focus on what you do want. You're going to pay attention to what you do want. You're going to pay attention to the good things, and you're really going to pay attention to how your body feels. Do you want to see this person again? That's kind of a bigger indicator, is do you want to see them again? Not are you going to settle and see them again? Not are you going to be, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm trying to say, but if there is a feeling inside of you that says, yeah, I want to give it a try, or even if there's that little bit of wishy-washy where you don't really know if you want to see them again, it's worth trying again. It's worth that second date, because again, just like you might be nervous, they might be nervous. And sometimes that awkwardness on the first date is just from nerves. And if you go out again and give them a chance, even if the first date was kind of bad or kind of awkward or kind of whatever, if you have that little voice inside of you saying, yeah, I should give them another chance, then I would say go for it and at least try one more time.
That is great advice. It's one of my rules of thumb, is typically if I go out with somebody and there wasn't anything horrible that happened, they weren't mean to the waiters, they weren't like slam the door in my face, there wasn't anything like, well, no, sometimes you go out with somebody and you're like, I know for sure that we are not a match, and you can have that very clear cut. But sometimes, like you said, you're like, I know I'm nervous, even though it feels like you've maybe practiced enough, but I always want to give that person, and if you have that, like you said, wishy-washy, kind of that mixed feeling, one more chance. What does it hurt to try drinks one more time? Hopefully those like first date nerves, like you said, are kind of out of the way. Maybe the conversation will flow a little bit better. Hopefully you've had a little texting time maybe in between. So a little bit more chance to kind of get to know each other and feel each other out, to kind of see if you're more of a match. but don't ever feel like you're obligated to give somebody that second chance. You can be wishy-washy and be like, I just don't really have the energy to get myself pumped and excited about dating this person. There just wasn't enough there. Say no. You doesn't necessarily have to be like 100% yes, I want to see them, 100% no. If you're in that middle and it just feels like it's more work to get yourself excited about a second date, I would say that's probably more of a no than maybe wishy-washy. But again, don't feel like you have to go on a second date because maybe they want to. Sometimes, especially as women, we kind of have this idea that I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want anybody to be mad. So we try and appease everybody. But if it's really not for you and you're really not enthused about it, then take that as your sign that maybe this is time to step back and experience something with somebody else.
Right. So let's talk about green flags and when you push the gas pedal down. I think that's always really fun to look at and see where somebody really might excite you, even after a first date. If you're getting pumped up and you get really excited to see somebody again. So let's talk about those things that can be green flags or that can be indicators one way or another that we may overlook.
One of like my kind of like biggest things, like, did we laugh? Did we have times on the date where we could make each other laugh, where we started to maybe have those like little inside jokes where you kind of had like maybe something went wrong on the date and now that's kind of bonded you. But I think for me, sense of humor is just such a huge portion. I want somebody who I can, be silly and goofy with. So if I kind of felt comfortable enough to, within reason and kindly, you can kind of tease and kind of rib each other. I think for me, that's usually one of my indicators of like, okay, this was a good date. I'd like to see where this is possibly going.
I think that's a great one, because sometimes you're so nervous that you even forget to go back and think about some of those little things. And again, we were talking about, did the conversation flow? I think that's another one. When you take a look at the conversation, we talked about it being a red flag, but that can also be a green flag if there was a lot of give and take. And also if you felt comfortable talking about yourself, even if there wasn't a lot of give and take, if you felt comfortable enough to talk about yourself, that could be something worth exploring and something to take note of.
Yes. I mean, yeah, like you said, even if there wasn't like always answer, like I ask a question, they ask a question, that kind of a thing. But if you did talk, did you felt heard? Did you feel like they were listening and actually absorbing the information that you said? If you made like extensions on the plans, did they listen to what you had to say about your preferences? They just kind of seem like the kind of human being you want to spend some more time with? It can be as easy as that.
Right. Absolutely. There was a study, and I am probably going to murder the statistics, right? But we're walking into this and assuming that we're going on this first date from somebody that we met online and we're looking for that instant chemistry. But there's a study that you have to spend an awful lot of hours with somebody in order for them to be considered a friend. And even I think it's close to 200 hours for them to be considered a close friend. And when you're picking a partner, in my mind, something that's important to me is friendship. And I want my partner to be my friend. And so one of the things I look for is, do I see this person as a confidant? Do I see this person as a friend? Do I see this person as somebody that I would ask to go do activities with me like I would my best friend?
Yeah. Would they be somebody who would drive me to the airport at 5 a.m? Sometimes you can ask yourself these all kinds of like weird questions. Would they be embarrassed if we, held hands in the middle of the grocery store? Some of those things, I think it's a good way to kind of look at future facing. Again, we're not trying to plan our marriage yet, but I think that's an important step of, can I picture myself maybe 1 month, 3 months, 6 months down the road with this person? And because it's not a bad thing to want to think about the future with somebody. We're not trying to say that at all. We're trying to rein in maybe that impulse to be like, they feel so perfect and it feels like we've known each other forever. I would be a little bit wary about that, because I think, especially in those early dates, we all put that best self forward. So giving yourself time to really get to know the person underneath those like first couple of date masks, who are really trying to impress you, who you are really trying to impress, and giving it some time so that you can truly see who that person is, and then eventually make a decision. Is this something that's going to be a little bit more long term, or is this just maybe a fun little fling?
Right. And we're kind of talking about what comes after a first date, but these steps can also be taken into account after a second date or after a third date. And thinking through some of that too, listening to the language that the other person is using. Way back at the beginning, before you even created your online profile, if you go back to our first episode, we talked about deciding what you want. Are you looking for a relationship? Are you looking to eventually get married? Are you just having fun? Are you just casually dating to, for whatever reason, just kind of sticking your toes back in the pond and exploring what's out there and not really looking for something serious? So keeping that in mind, and also as you're going through and reflecting back on your first date, your second date, your third date, really taking a look and listening to the language that they use. I remember I dated a guy and we went on a first date, and that one was okay. And so I felt good, and we went out again. And after the second date, he was clingy, PDA to the max, something. And I'm a touchy-feely person, kind of, sometimes when I want to be. And so that clinginess didn't work for me. But even more than that, we're sitting down watching a movie, and he tells me that he wants to be living with somebody after 6 months. And I don't. I have no desire to do that. I am going on 5 years, 4.5, almost 5 years in a relationship where we're not living together. And so thinking about listening to the language that the other person is using, are you guys on the same page with what you want? Because it's really not fair to be in a relationship when somebody has an expectation that you're going to be living together in 6 months and you have no desire to move in with somebody and be that serious.
Yes, I think that goes back to that whole communication part of it. If you are communicating, hey, these are my boundaries, hey, this is what I'm looking for, hey, this is kind of what my expectations are, and they're either listening and not respecting, or feel like they're not listening at all, taking that into consideration. Because if you're like 3 or 4 dates in and they've made this comment about, wanting to get married soon, or wanting to move in, or trying to move this relationship maybe even at all faster than what you're ready for, those are kind of the things you're like, okay, they're not really listening to me, and we're not that deep into this yet. So really taking into account, are they respectful of my wants and desires, and are those starting to kind of match up? Now that you're going on date like 3 and 4, start to have maybe some of those conversations. You can start to maybe get a little bit deeper, saying like, hey, where do you see yourself in like a year, or relationship wise, what are you kind of looking for? Start to have some of those conversations so that maybe you're on the same page and you're like, hey, great, we can keep moving forward. Or you'll start to see those differences, be like, you know what, I don't think this is going to be the right match for me, because just in these little conversations, I don't think we're heading in quite the same direction.
Right. It's not uncommon for there to be some differences. That's what makes relationships complicated, because people are dynamic. We're always changing, and you're not going to find somebody that is exactly the same as you. So these don't have to be set in stone. I want to preface that they don't have to be set in stone, but just really sitting back and knowing where you're at every step of the way. The better you know yourself, the better partner you're going to be in the relationship. And finding the right relationship is about being a better partner, not finding a better partner.
Yes, because really, ultimately, the only thing you have control over is you, and how you react to these situations, and how you approach the situation. So being very clear, and knowing that, yes, in 6 months your feelings might change around this person, but if you know now in this moment that living together with somebody, marriage, some of those big things are on your no-fly list, then that needs to be something that you stick with and be very firm and solid in those convictions, because it's okay to have those wants and those desires and to communicate those, and to necessarily not give more time to people who can't respect that.
And it's okay if those wants and desires change. It is not okay to let somebody convince you to change them.
Yes, I think that's the key point, is that natural evolution of a relationship, yes, things are going to change, but if you feel forced to make that change, that's where, again, flag on the play on that one.
Right. A solid relationship is about releasing your expectations of who somebody should be and allowing them to be who they are. And so whatever is on your no-fly list, that is who you are, and that is what you want out of a relationship. And that's okay. If it doesn't match the person that you're dating, if it doesn't match the person that you went on a first date with, go on a first date with somebody else. It's okay. And as a matter of fact, it's great, because you are the only you that there is. And whatever your desire for in a relationship, you should not be expected by anybody else to change, to make changes to that. You can change it, but you shouldn't let anybody else dictate that, expect you to, or demand that you make that change.
Yes, absolutely, would 100% agree with that. So all in all, really, all of this is to say, who knows if you want a second date with this person? You get to decide, and you get to have whatever choice that is going to be. And taking that moment to reflect with a little bit of that like 2020 hindsight, trying to maybe not gloss over anything, but as realistically as you can, kind of reviewing the date, picking out, find those high points. Don't necessarily focus on everything that maybe wasn't great, but was there 3 really good things that you found about the date? Was there 3 really good things that you learned about that person? So focusing on the positive, and then being honest with yourself about whether you want to see them again, because again, you're not obligated to go on a second date just because you went on the first. Even if you said something at the end of that first date about, yeah, we should do this again, does not mean you have to do this again, because, you know, sometimes that politeness slips out before we can stop it. And it's just sometimes easier to close on that note, but being really clear on what makes you feel good about going into that second date, and making sure that that person is going to tick some of those fun boxes so that you want to go on that second date.
Yes. And if you decide to go on that second date, drop us a line. Let us know how it went. Tell us your stories. We want to hear all your stories, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the fantastic. You know, we want to hear everything. We want to be able to talk about it. Open space here. So drop us a line, let us know how it went, and we will be back next week.
Bye.